Today, we're going to look at Trogdor, our Holy Fire Paladin that has shown up a few times on the channel over the years, and why he is the template for a broken build in 2.4. But we'll also talk about why a nerf to Holy Fire itself may not be the right choice. In the background currently, you're watching the 2.4 test run of Trogdor, and you may notice that things are popping left and right, and even the bosses are going down fairly quickly to his damage, but only a little more than they did to the old version. Before we get to his proper build, it's worth noting Trogdor is a bit of a special case because it is a post-game build with extremely expensive equipment and somewhat niche use. And this is true of every Holy Fire build video released talking about how Holy Fire is the strongest build in Diablo 2 2.4. And with the changes to Holy Fire, he does enter the realm of being overpowered in certain areas. Though this is at the cost of 3 Sur runes, 3 Low runes, a Cham, a Pole, and a Vex, which most players will tell you is not a cheap setup. And that's before the uniques and rares pack in the other slots, the mercenary equipment, or even the charms. In fact, even with modern rune drops, this will take you at the bare minimum several months of dedicated farming if you're lucky, and several years if you're unlucky. So for most people, it's only in reach via trading, which will also be expensive and time consuming unless you have access to people funneling you items. So, since we've seen the melting at the top end, let's throw in a comparison real quick of a self-cast Holy Fire Paladin, again just for comparison, which I just threw plus 23 Holy Fire on and invested fully in Holy Fire and its synergies, which just puts us one level lower than Trogdor's setup, which is within reach of a more normal mid to high budget post-game Paladin, thanks to the affordability of skill charms and lower end plus skill sources, assuming you've gotten far enough to get yourself a low torch and a nihilus, and a couple skill items around the board, and just splurged a bit on the Pole and Vex for a flickering flame helm. So it's not super budget, but it is affordable. And watching this, you'd probably see why I'm saying hold your pitchforks at bay for a moment when it comes to Holy Fire, and whether it should or should not be nerfed in 2.4. Now, before we get to my recommendation as how to fix this broken, overpowered build, let's take a look at the gear you need to reproduce this, well, broken build, and why it works that way, since there's 3 major factors at play here, and removing even one of them drastically changes how strong the build is. The first factor is the equipment-based Holy Fire. Through the use of the Dragon Armor and Dragon Shield, each taking Sur, Low, and Soul, as well as the use of the Hand of Justice, which itself takes Sur, Cham, Am, and Low. By stacking these 3 items, you get a level 44 Holy Fire active on your character, without taking up your active aura slot, meaning you can use any additional aura you want, and this level 44 Holy Fire synergizes with your Resist Fire and Salvation hardpoints, allowing you to bump it up into high values. The second factor is how this Holy Fire scales, dealing double damage next to your character and base damage at the skill's range limit. This means the range limit is vitally important, since the radius is about the same as the full vertical length of the screen, meaning you're hitting about a half screen's worth of stuff you can't see, and it's scaling based on this distance, meaning the things you can see approaching from above or below you or an equal distance from the sides, you're already halfway into the damage scaling effect of the double damage, with things completely off screen just taking the base damage. The third factor is that conviction aura we have going on, which has a 13.3 yard range, which is just a little smaller than the normal vertical screen space, and in Lord of Destruction makes a nice ellipse that approaches but doesn't touch the end of the screen. The reason this is so important is with minus 150% resist, which we have here with our max level conviction, on top of a bit over minus 30% fire resist from Hand of Justice and the Flickering Flame Runeward, we are flooring every enemy with less than 80% fire resist down to negative 100%. This means we are doubling our already doubled short range damage. Without all 3 of these factors, the build slows down drastically as we showed earlier, so nerfing Holy Fire itself may not be the right answer to fixing this fringe case. Instead, my recommendation to Blizzard is to make the item-based Holy Elemental auras, yes, all 3 of them, actually all 4 if you count Sanctuary, only scale the damage when they are your active auras as opposed to equipment cast auras. This alone would knock the damage down drastically, but not so far that it would be useless, and would still preserve the synergy bump and in turn the utility of the build to be a bit longer range but back to lower damage competitor to the cheaper Holy Shock Tesla variant. And I feel bad saying that Tesla is cheaper. There's two ways they could approach this technically too, and that is either making the equipment auras a unique special skill like the Hellfire's Firestorm, or the Balrog Infernos that you get roasted by left and right, where it shares the screen name but not all of the functionality, and just adds the synergies to its template to make it kind of function similar. Or they could introduce a flag that checks if it's the active aura versus equipment aura, and just have it only do the double damage as things get close if it is the active aura. As far as the details on what I chose to run on this specific build, if you want to recreate it and test it yourself that is, we run the already mentioned Double Dragon and Hand of Justice setup, as well as Flickering Flame as mentioned, which is worth noting the plus skills from here or elsewhere already do not affect equipment auras, so don't worry there, it's not important to get plus skills for this to work. And help out the rest of the build, we use High Lord's Wrath and Lava Gout to hit our fastest breakpoint with the Phase Blade Zeal, because you do have to stab things in the face if they're fire immune, or even certain bosses and stuff like that. You could use any 20% attack speed gloves, I just use these for lazy enchant so I don't have to use Demon Limb for it. On the rings, I'm using my standard dual Leech and Ravenfrost combo you'll see across pretty much all of my martial builds, and I went with String of Ears for damage reduction and a pinch more life leech. And War Travelers because, well, War Travelers. It's stats, a pinch of physical damage, and Magic Find. For charms, it's just Hellfire Torch, Annihilus, a bunch of resist charms, and a few junk charms with damage and attack rating or cold damage to extend chill. Nothing insanely special. Skill-wise, we went with 20 Fire Resist and 20 Salvation to synergize with Holy Fire to make it actually deal damage, which puts it at a base damage of about twice what it was in 2.3, though with scaling, that puts it at 4 times when the enemy is point blank with you, which makes it a solid match for level 30 Holy Shock with Tesladin runs. The other skills we invest in are 20 in Conviction for the resist reduction, and then the remainder into Zeal, Sacrifice, and Holy Shield, depending on preference. For me, it was 20 Sacrifice, 1 Zeal, and the rest into Holy Shield, just to make max block easier and the duration longer, and since I didn't need a massive attack rating boost on Zeal thanks to Conviction, we opted for the Sacrifice damage source. Now, one major thing different from other player builds you may notice, at least compared to the videos I've seen talking about this, is my use of the Barbarian Mercenary for this build. He's packing Guardian Angel and Vampire Gaze with an Rune in the armor and a Scintillating Jewel of Fervor in the helmet for resist and attack speed. But more importantly, he's packing the Plague Rune Word. And, of course, ignore his damage display, he actually gets double damage from this weapon because it's a one-hander, so his display is still suffering from a severe case of LCS. But what we use him for, and Plague, is the 20% cast of lower resist when struck, and well, his aggressive AI combined with the tankiness above and beyond other mercenaries. This works out exceptionally well, with Battlecry boosting his durability significantly, even more by nerfing melee enemies that attack him, while lower resist dumps the resist of enemies that don't get close enough to him for him to hit with that, meaning everything that's not immune is going to take double damage, and you can also make it so we can just break almost every immune that matters, and everything else is just gravy that speeds things up and keeps them alive even more, keeping enemies frozen and all that other fun stuff. Overall, yes, this build is overpowered as hell, but if we step it back like I recommend, I think we will fall more in line with the rest of the builds while still not making its outrageous price of entry a complete waste. So instead of breaking everything, we could make it basically be just a true late game strong as hell build instead of an overpowered or underpowered waste of runes.